this visible language that I'm talking about, there is a precedent for it in nature. There's a very interesting book, which if you're into animal communication, it's well worth reading. It's called Communication and Non-Communication Among the Cephalopods. And it points out that octopi have this ability to change their color and their shape and their surface texture. And it was at first assumed that this had to do with camouflage against complex backgrounds. But it turns out that it has nothing to do with that, or very little to do with that, that octopi communicate visually. And so, in a sense, the octopus is the model for the kind of future evolution of human communications that I'm suggesting we need. The octopus is, from the point of view of another octopus, a naked mind, an entirely naked mind, because it does not transduce its thoughts into acoustical waves which move across space. Future evolution of human communication across space. Future evolution of human communication. And are then reconstructed in a culturally sanctioned dictionary, it actually becomes its meaning. It translates syntax into 3 dimensions, and it dances its intent. The soft body of these creatures allows them to fold and unfold and reveal and hide parts of themselves very rapidly, as fast as we can make speech. This is a potential model for how human beings might communicate. Across space. After all, if we were simply naked minds, I imagine us as existing as somewhat filamentaceous creatures in a semi-aqueous cybernetic medium across space, displaying our syntactical intent on our surface. You would become what you mean, and the octopus does that. The reason octopi extrude ink into the water is so that they can form a private thought. Future evolution of human communications across space. Well, the question is, what about the way ayahuasca is being done in America without icaros and ritual? I've never sat in on an American ayahuasca session. I know they occur in several different styles. The thing about ayahuasca that you have to be aware of, that is both a strength and a weakness of it, is that unlike mushrooms or peyote or iboga or morning glory seeds or datura, it is a drug. It is a drug in the sense that it's combined of two ingredients and made by somebody. Nobody makes peyote. Nobody makes mushrooms. But somebody makes ayahuasca. Ayahuasca. It is a drug, ayahuasca. Ayahuasca. It can be made badly or it can be made well. So the first issue is, how was it made? Ayahuasca. And the style of these more public ayahuasca circles is to make it mild. Ayahuasca. They don't want people swinging from the chandeliers. Ayahuasca can range over a spectrum from what's all the excitement about to, hang on, Hannah. What's all the excitement about? Ayahuasca. Hang on, Hannah. Ayahuasca. Hang on, Hannah. Ayahuasca. What's all the excitement about? It takes a bit of fiddling to get it right. As far as DMT is concerned, ayahuasca is driven by DMT. Driven by DMT. Driven by DMT. What made me go to the Amazon was I first encountered DMT in the underground in Berkeley. And I was absolutely amazed. I mean, I had already taken LSD, but for me, and to this moment, DMT is just the most amazing thing in the universe. The most amazing thing in the universe. DMT. The most amazing thing in the universe. It shouldn't exist. It's impossible. And every time I do it, I come down and I say, this is impossible. The most amazing thing in the universe. DMT. Just the most amazing thing in the universe. It shouldn't exist. DMT. It's impossible. The most amazing thing in the universe. DMT. DMT. I mean, to call that a drug? What a joke. I mean, it just masquerades as a drug. It's not a drug. That's preposterous. The problem with DMT is its incredible power. that only the most intrepid can form any coherent impression whatsoever of what's going on if it's a strong trip. I mean, there are subthreshold trips where you just graze the tummy of the beast, DMT, and then people come down with various models of archetypal closure with the cosmic carnival, DMT. That's the archetype of DMT, is the cosmic circus, the cosmic circus. If you actually get a strong hit of it, which is in no way dangerous, but simply a true boundary-dissolving hit, DMT, it's into some place, it's almost like DMT. Well, I once said, you know, there's danger of death by astonishment. That's the major danger, is death by astonishment. You just get in there and you say, my God, I thought I had some expectation of what was possible, and instead this is just so blown out. It somewhat freaks me out, I have to confess. It is so alien. Alien. So huge, so complete in itself, so unrelated, so huge, so to our petty concerns on this planet. Alien. You know, what does this say about the archetypes? So alien. There is no archetype for this. Not in the painting of the Bushman, not in the ecstasies of Hildegard von Bingen, not in the ravings of Mandaean ecstatics. Human spiritual experience never got this deep. So huge, so complete, so alien. So alien. Spiritual experience never got this deep, never tore open this doorway. And yet what? It's a long toke away for an ordinary human being? So alien. How could something that titanic, so alien, and beautiful be kept secret, when what we do is we seek in all corners, in all times and places, for the bizarre, the outre, the unthinkable. We're always turning over rocks. Secret teachings, you know, ancient cities, ruins, lost tribes, you name it. Well then, here is this thing which is like the absolute quintessence of what all those things are aiming for. So huge, so complete. More stunning than the rise of Atlantis from the Atlantic seaboard is a toke of DMT. More appalling than the arrival of alien starfleets in the skies of our planet. And yet, it's here. It's here. DMT. And I don't often invoke it. I mean, for me to talk about it is to invoke it. Because it's weird to talk about it. Because it reminds me that we don't know what we're doing. At all. Fuck it. Fuck it. Because it reminds me that we don't know what we're doing. At all. Fuck it. Fuck it. That we sit in rooms discussing all this stuff, and you know, a war rages, ignorant armies clash by night, that whole thing. Fuck it. You know, this extraordinarily powerful thing, the depth of which, the measure of which is so hard to take, lies very near what I had hoped for from ayahuasca. Was my brother and I, when we got into this DMT stuff, we said, we've got to slow down this movie. I mean, you get in there for about 70 seconds. The first 35 of which is taken up with you checking all your meters to make sure you're not dead. That's what you assume. You know, you said, I did it, I'm dead. Fuck it, I'm dead. Fuck it, I'm dead. Chest rising and falling. Chest rising and falling. Fuck it, I'm dead. Thoughts continuing in linear progression. Apparently I'm not dead. Apparently I'm something else. Well, then by the time you sort it out, you're usually coming down. And people come down babbling, raving, raving, raving. I mean, I've seen, you know, people who've headed mega corporations, people who are accustomed to ordering hundreds of people around, just completely come apart. DMT, come apart. So our notion was slow the movie down, come apart, get in there. Ayahuasca looks like a strategy for doing that. Come apart. And it makes the whole notion of history seem crazy. Come apart. I mean, we're primitives because we diddle around with atom smashers and stealth bombers and stuff like that. I mean, you know, DMT. And these people have this other thing, so of course they don't wear clothes, build up. Would you? We're primitives. We're primitives. Largely, I would say what we've learned from 20, 25 years of dealing with this is that our strategy was right. Ayahuasca will let you in to these places. And so will psilocybin. What I've decided, based on experience, we're primitives, is that what I'm interested in is a very tiny subset of all the smorgasbord of possible altered states and experiences that life and nature offer up. That there are many altered states. Datura, ketamine, MDMA, endlessly, and then, you know, states brought on by ordeal and and fasting and meditation. I am only interested as a phenomenologist, definitely more with the attitude of the scientist than some kind of conclusion drawer. I'm interested in this very circumscribed area in organic nature. We're primitives. Because it's not supposed to be there, folks. It's like a doorway into the previous universe. The whole, at the height of Islam in the 10th century, the poets of the Mughal dynasty said of the city of Isfahan in Iran, because of its mosques and architecture, that it was half the world. The Isfahan is half the world. DMT is half the world. DMT is half the world. The shiny, bright, active, exfoliating, and bizarre part, DMT is half the world. Well then, we then are poised in this strange dimension of diminished possibility. Where are we? What is that? DMT. What is it to possess a body such that you can use it as an instrument to turn on and off these places? Body. How does it reflect on the quest for understanding of the here and now? How does it reflect on the quest for, immortality or enlightenment, or a sense of fitting in to the cosmic purpose? I don't know. I mean, one could play a reductionist game and say that the human brain-mind system is an alarm clock. DMT is a hammer. Hit the alarm clock with the hammer and you learn all about gears. DMT is a hammer because they spring out and become visible. But, and this is how science works. DMT is a hammer. This is the scientific method. But, and this is how science works. This is the scientific method. Smash it, then count the pieces. Find the bigger pieces, find the littlest pieces, smash them. DMT is a hammer. Count the pieces, find the little pieces, smash them. That's how it proceeds. Well, obviously, that's not going to take us too far in this domain. DMT is a hammer because it's entirely made up of structure, of connection, of relationship, of thought. DMT is a hammer. DMT is a hammer because I'm concerned about the planet and the predicament we're in and the way we spend our resources and cheat our children of a sane future and all that, I keep trying to reconnect this back into the human world. But I frankly don't know whether that can be done. Another area I work in is I try to connect it up to the perennial philosophies of humanity. Zen and Buddhism and shaman. I don't know whether that can be done. The shamans that I have gotten really close to have not been, I would not call, they were able to cure people. DMT is a hammer. But they had no pretension of spiritual accomplishment. They weren't even interested in that. They were interested in what they would call understanding. Understanding. The same thing which drives a scientist. They say, I mean, Don Fidel, who I took most of my ayahuasca with, understanding. We would take it on Saturday nights with a group of about 40 people and cure. And then we would take it on Wednesday nights, just he and I or a couple of other people, and that was for learning. DMT is a hammer. He always said, and he said, you can't cure unless you learn DMT. And I felt very comfortable with these people because it from the outside it looks like ritual and taboo and power, and from the inside it's just, hey, let's all cook something up and try to figure it out. It was totally familiar to me from my days in Berkeley in the 60s. It's the head ethic. DMT. It's cook it up, try it out, try and make sense of it with your friends. DMT. You see, I think it's very disempowering to believe that somebody else has the answer. DMT. And that your life consists of sorting out a bunch of options to try and find this person who has the answer. The generous point of view, the ecumenical point of view when looking at the world's religions and spiritual traditions is to say everybody has a piece of the answer. You know, the Buddhists have a piece, the Kabbalists have a piece, everybody has a piece. The mushroom on this subject is extremely ungenerous. It says nobody has a piece. It's just preposterous. You know, the reason the world doesn't make sense to you is because the world doesn't make sense to you. The mushroom, how could it? I mean, look where you're starting from. The mushroom, where is it writ in adamantine that troops of monkeys should comprehend the architectonics of the cosmos? The mushroom, you know, it's just not part of the deal. The mushroom. So then you have to rest with some kind of the mushroom provisional arrangement. But I somehow think that the forced evolution of language is how we're going to work our way back into taking care of our planet. And that psychedelics are the catalyst for this. They show us, number one, that there is a transcendent other. which I certainly didn't believe there was till I took psychedelics. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic. I spent a lot of time deconditioning myself from the transcendent other. And embracing a kind of materialist agnosticism. Well, that lasted 15 seconds into the first DMT trip, and then that had been vaporized for all time. So I think we need to honor the religious impulse, but I'm very skeptical of all hierarchical con games. The transcendent other, where the idea is somebody knows something and somebody else doesn't. And then they have to trade off their relationship. DMT. You know, the Rolling Stones have a song that says, you don't get what you want, you get what you need. The transcendent other. I don't think you're going to spend very long involved with these things at a deep level without scaring your socks off. And one of the great things about these psychedelic teachers is that they are so gentle with beginners. And then the flip side of that coin is they are so unforgiving with veterans. The transcendent other. And I don't know. I mean, I have hard trips. The transcendent other. Often. And the way I explain it to myself is, you know, I pretty much accept Rupert Sheldrake's notion of the morphogenetic field. And feel like the psychedelics amplify the morphogenetic field of the totality. And, you know, why shouldn't I have difficult trips? The transcendent other. The transcendent other. The totality is in such a weird state of turmoil. I mean, you couldn't pay me to take 5 grams of mushrooms in the present circumstances. Simply because I can feel the riptides in the historical dimension. 5 grams of mushrooms just churning everything into white water. I mean, I'd stay out of the water till it dies down a little. 5 grams of mushrooms. Fear is a problem because, well, there are different reasons, but here's a reductionist reason. These compounds are CNS stimulants. Fear is a problem. And that means they're going to stimulate what's called the fight or flight reflex in the hind brain. One of the hardest things I think you have to learn to do is to discipline the hind brain. Fear, you know, to sit in a full lotus position, absolutely petrified with fear and not do anything about it, except breathe and sing, you know. Fear is a problem. Paul Herbert. The other Herbert. The Herbert who wrote Dune, who is such a minor figure that I can't remember his first name. Frank Herbert. He has a wonderful thing in there talking about fear is a problem. And he says fear comes like a wind out of the desert. And it blows through you. And all you can do is let it blow itself out. And you really can do this. Fear is a problem. You just wait. Fear is a kind of state of agitation of the organism that chemically cannot maintain itself. So wait it through. Then in terms of practical suggestions, sing. You must sing. I mean, it's terrible to have it sit heavily on you and to try and deal with it like this. You know, just crumple. You have to oxygenate your body. You have to begin moving energy through your body. You can sing your way out of most situations. That's the best advice. And you can breathe your way out of most situations. And it's a set of techniques. No, you're quite right. It's a set of techniques. They're very simple, but if you don't know them, you're in deep, deep water. And breath control, and not being afraid to articulate. We have some kind of taboo against sounding. But you know, I've started in the depths of hell singing to save my soul and managed to sing my way right through normality and right on into heaven, to heaven, to heaven. It takes courage. And courage is not something that is demanded of us very much in the modern world. I mean, we occasionally deal with large amounts of fear. Like when some jackass cuts in front of you on the freeway and, you know, you soak your clothes with sweat in under a third of a second. Those kinds of things. But courage, where we actually determine to do something that feels dangerous or challenging to us, and then doing it, we don't do. And especially boundary dissolving challenges. I mean, the macho type will, you know, climb El Capitan, jump out of airplanes, and that sort of thing. But strangely enough, those macho types are sometimes the most reluctant to just sit quietly in their living room on 5 dried grams. Because it's a different kind of surrender. 5 dried grams. You know, it's a surrender to something feminine and penetrating, and you don't have to. It's the opposite reflex. Surrender is the opposite reflex to conquest, especially when it's culture bound. For purposes of operational efficiency, I just have long ago decided nothing works but drugs. 5 dried grams. And it causes a lot of friction. I mean, that's the hard way of putting it. It's really nothing works but plants. 5 dried grams. I put in a lot of time trying, breath control and pranayama and all these things and reading the literature. And I'm just not convinced that they're getting it. The literature doesn't reflect it. 5 dried grams. The mystical literature in all times and places tends toward unitary effulgence or something. The white light. In other words, everything is supposed to be, all contradictions are dissolved, everything becomes love and light, and the hierophany. This is the archetypal hierophany. This is not what they're talking about in the Amazon. They enter into a world of jeweled multiplicity. There is no effort to push it towards some kind of Neoplatonic end state. It's that what is revealed is a dimension of incredible complexity. And some people have said to me, that I'm lost in samsara. I can accept that. That sounds right. I love multiplicity. I mean, I love 5 dried grams. It's for me all in the details. That's what I love, the richness, the texture of it. And it's a troubling question for people because people want to be told that there's another way to get to it. 5 dried grams. And there may be, but it's unbelievably difficult, unbelievably uncertain, and very hard to recognize. Schizophrenia. It doesn't convince me entirely that that's the same thing. Many schizophrenics are obviously very, very unhappy people. And you see, I just don't feel the force of this argument that you should be able to do it on your own. Why should you be able to do it on your own? How about that you can't do it unless you humble yourself to cut a deal with a plant? 5 dried grams. That seems more logical to me. That it begins with an act of humility instead of an act of, no women, no dope, no this. I'm going to seal myself into the alchemical vessel. And I'm very interested in the nuts and bolts details of how this happens. Cut a deal with a plant. And my brother is a pharmaceutical chemist, drug designer, so we work on the nuts and bolts issue. I want to know where these visions are coming from. I would like a complete understanding of the psychedelic experience. Cut a deal with a plant. I would like to turn the light of the psychedelic experience upon the psychedelic experience. And try to understand what's happening. The best theory so far, I think my brother and I put together in a book we wrote called The Invisible Landscape, the light of the psychedelic experience. There are certain clues. Obviously, memories persist in human beings throughout a lifetime. But we know that no physical part of the organism persists through a lifetime except the neural DNA. The light of the psychedelic experience. That means that we either have to hypothesize that memories are copied perfectly and handed along in some system, the light of the psychedelic experience, so that you can have them even though every atom in your body has changed, except the neural DNA. Or we have to hypothesize that they exist in the neural DNA. That memories are actually stored in the DNA. Well, no notion evokes such scorn from molecular biologists as this one, and they just rush in to set you straight in a hurry. The light of the psychedelic experience. And the first thing they tell you is, well, you've completely misunderstood the notion of information. You see, DNA stores genetic information. It stores codons. It stores these 3 amino acid sequences. To think that it could go from that to storing experience is just a complete misunderstanding of what is being suggested. The light of the psychedelic experience. You say, oh, well then, so what's your explanation for the persistence of memory? Oh, well, we don't actually have one. We're working on that. Well, I think that the persistence of memory argues that the light of the psychedelic experience, the 90% of the DNA which is not known to code for any protein or to have any so-called silent portions of the genome, which are about 85% of it is silent. Somehow, information, experience is being stored there. I mean, this is the Lamarckian heresy because they said it fed back into the genetic part of the DNA. But there may be, in this one molecule, both genetic storage and epigenetic storage. The light of the psychedelic experience. Well, then when you look at these drug molecules that we've been talking about, the psychedelics, what you see structurally that they all have in common is they all have very reactive rings. Benzene rings usually built up on a pentexyl group, a 5-sided group in the middle. They're extremely reactive molecules. Okay, It was discovered in the 1960s that there's a phenomenon that nobody knows why it happens called intercalation. These drug molecules, if we could blow one up to this big, it would be thin. It would be flat. It's what they call planar. And lo and behold, when you look at the dimensions of this molecule against the dimensions of the bond site that lies between the nucleotides of DNA, you discover that this drug molecule can just slip right in there like toast into a toaster. And they sit down on this very large molecule, the psychedelics, the neural DNA. And they begin to broadcast its electron spin resonance at a higher frequency or at a higher amplitude than is happening in normal metabolism. The psychedelics. And that this amplifying of the electron spin resonance of DNA is what we experience subjectively as the onset of a psychedelic experience. The psychedelics. Well, now you see this gives cogency to what we're talking about here, because it shows that there is a real material mechanism in the core of our cells which is relating to this molecule, and then all this information is flowing out. So we're beginning to create a coherent map appealing to the material mind of how these things may work to transduce higher cortical experiences. Obviously, the mind-brain system can be thought of as like an automobile, in the sense that there are always fuel efficiency modifications and design modifications that are possible to imagine, which would make the whole system work better. Serotonin is the molecule that is being competed with by these drug molecules. The psychedelics. Well, may it not then be that what these drug molecules represent is the same thing that serotonin represents, but in a slightly more efficient packaging? That somehow, from the point of view of metabolic dynamics, the drug molecule is more efficient. It obviously is. The psychedelics.
We would say with Hindus and Buddhists that if I run into a catastrophe, it is my karma. You see, that means far more than that it is a punishment for something I did wrong in the past. That is a legalistic view of karma. But a naturalistic or organic view of karma is, in fact, that what happens to me is what I do. And that in a certain sense, I want what happens to me. We can use want. Notice how we use this word. It means to desire and it means to lack or to need. We say to somebody, you're wanting. You're deficient in something. So it's rather alarming, really, when you consider it, that you always get what you want, invariably. even though you may think that it's entirely opposed to your wishes. But if it's your karma, everything that happens to you, put it in another way, everything that comes to you is a return to you of what goes out of you. Yes, obviously, that's absurd. If you confine the definition of yourself to your voluntary, conscious behavior, that's a ridiculous definition of oneself. Oneself, by any stretch of the imagination, must involve far more than the conscious and voluntary aspects of our behavior. And if we see that it involves intimately and inescapably the behavior of what we call the environment, and see that these two are moving together like the two sides of the snake when it swims, then you get a very curious feeling. You have to be careful of it if you've got a Western background. Because this is what happens to a lot of people who play around with psychedelic chemicals. There are many, many cases of inflation among these people. That is to say, when you get this sensation that the inside and the outside are moving together, you may think, I am ruling it. I am God in the Western sense of the word. Therefore, your ego, instead of being, as it were, integrated and transcended with all this process, merely assumes vast dimensions, is blown up by the mystical experience. So you get the holier-than-thou people going around who seem to think that they're above all human conventions and have no obligations to anyone or anything because they're divine and they can do as they damn please. What they haven't realized is that doing as you will isn't a new kind of behavior that you suddenly put on and say, from now on I'm going to go around doing as I will. You have to realize first that that's what you've always been doing. And you could look at this from a very simple point of view. Well, now, what about the people who did good and who did the things that they didn't want to do? You know, everybody's mother said to us, darling, sometimes we have to do things we don't like. Well, what about that? Well, you can always say, the kid obeyed the mother and did the thing that it didn't like because that was the better part of wisdom. In other words, if he hadn't done that, something worse would have happened. We choose the lesser of two evils. And when you find yourself in a situation where you have to choose the lesser of two evils, then you say, I want out of here. And you take the easiest way. You take the line of least resistance. So that's your doing. Now, you can pursue that more profoundly when you stop thinking about human behavior as something that responds to the compulsion of an environment. And you can get out of that when you see the behavior of the environment as an essential aspect of you. So it isn't, as it were, the environment starting something which you are therefore compelled to follow. It's the whole system moving together. So then you get in the state of liberated or mystical consciousness, you very often feel that a hill is lifting you up as you walk up it. The ground seems to heave beneath your feet, and up you go. And you get this strange feeling of lightness, of effortlessness, walking on air, never a care, you know. This wonderful sense that there are no obstructions anywhere. There's nothing, as it were, banging you and making you do that. It all flows together. And that's a very common sense. You are actually, in that state of consciousness, you are perceiving the goings-on, the Tao, the course of nature, in the way it's happening. But in the ordinary way, you've been conditioned to resist it, to fight it, and to use those sensations of resistance to create a sensory basis for what you describe as the ego. The ego, in practice, is a sense of strain. When you are aware of I, you are aware of a basic discomfort, which is located basically between the eyes, somewhere in here, a sort of tightness. Also, it's in other centers too. It's in the solar plexus, and there are various physical centers, in other words, where this constant tension or resistance against it is going on. And that's what you feel when you talk about I. When that tension ceases, you discover immediately that the separate ego has disappeared, and that what I refers to is simply the total panorama of experience, everything that's happening. That's I. Obviously, I don't know all of it, because I can't inspect all of it with my radar, with my conscious attention. That would be a ridiculous undertaking, to know everything in that sense. We know it in a much better way, as we know how to grow hair and open and close our hands. So, this point of view can be understood if we clarify the initial problems we have about it. And I suppose the first problem is, if we accept the notion that everything that happens to us is our own karma, our own doing, then we have to be very careful of, shall we say, the devil of omnipotence, of inflation, of feeling that your ego is what is in control of all this. And the second thing is, if you think then that everything that happens to everybody is what they really want to happen, then you can absolve yourself from any qualms about being unkind to someone, because you could say, well, the unkindness I did you was what you really wanted, wasn't it? You know that business about the responsibility of the person who gets murdered for getting murdered? There is a curious sense in which a lot of people go around looking for trouble. Freud pointed out quite correctly the psychology of accident-prone individuals. They seem to be attracting trouble like lights attract moths. And we're all doing that, but we manage to remain unconscious of it, so that we can praise and blame and play the game which says, that's not my fault, that's your fault. And so we go around apportioning faults to everybody. Because if we're going to apportion praise for what the good things people do, you can't make praise mean anything unless you also go around blaming. praise and blame go together. Supposing everybody was acting in a praiseworthy way, and we praised everybody for everything, they'd get tired of it. They wouldn't even notice it anymore. So long as you're going to get a kick out of being praised, you've got to go around blaming too. It's very simple. But if you see the folly of that praising and blaming are just creating each other, then you don't praise and you don't blame. You just dig the whole thing. And that's why, when we encounter very great sages, you never hear them blame people, and they very rarely praise anyone. You try to start gossip in the presence of such a person, and you make a derogatory comment about someone. It's as if you had thrown a rock into a well and heard no splash. And a funny feeling, because that you get no response. You get no agreement. And if you praise somebody, there's also likely nothing to be said, except perhaps some remark that, of course, you're praising the beloved in all its manifestations. And this disconcerts some people terribly. I've always noticed that real sages never gossip, never criticize persons. And because they understand so well. The French saying, tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner, to understand all is to forgive all, is so true if you are experienced in just the ordinary way of dealing with human problems. If you've been a counselor or psychotherapist or minister or anything like that, you very soon get to realize how vastly complicated people are. And to see that they really are in the messes they're in, not because of anything, but that's the way it is. And you stop blaming people. And because you don't blame people, you have open ears and people come and seek your advice. They don't want to come to someone who's a counselor who will bawl them out. It's like dentists who simply accept the fact that people really don't take care of their teeth and realize that the job of a dentist is precisely to look after people who can't be bothered to take care of their teeth. That's why he's in business. So a good dentist doesn't bawl his patients out because they didn't do this, that, and the other. Just accept it. Same with doctors. They know perfectly well that nobody's going to live by the rules of health. And they're very vague as to what they are. And, you know, there's every kind of theory about how you ought to live and what is healthy, but they change in fashion. And you ought to eat this kind of diet in 1921. By the time it's 1930, they've changed their ideas altogether. By the time it's 1960, it's back again to a mixture between 1921 and 1894. Something like that. You see, it's always changing. So while the rules are not so... You see, if they were all absurd, it would be easy. But they're not all absurd. There's some truth in it, always. But nobody's ever quite sure.